On Tuesday, March 5th, newly elected Hungarian President Tamas Shujok signed a law on ratification of the protocol on Sweden's accession to NATO. Back on February 26th, the Parliament of the Republic ratified the protocol on the kingdom's accession to the alliance, and therefore the final removal of all obstacles in the way of Stockholm was a technical matter. Anyway, for a whole week and a half, NATO had a reason to talk about the historical unity of the alliance. However, the period of agreement did not last long. On the same day that Tamas Shujok signed the long-awaited law, a new reason for disagreement arose between Hungary and the partners. The fact is that on October 1st, the long-term Secretary General of the alliance, Jens Stoltenberg, must leave his post, for which the Allies will have to choose a new leader. This year, a successor was found. Mark Rutte, whose candidacy was supported by two-thirds of the bloc's countries, including the United States, became the favorite in the race for the vacant post. Mr. Rutte even began to try on a new role and, for example, during a recent visit to Kharkiv, where he signed a security agreement between Ukraine and the Netherlands with President Vladimir Zelensky, he tried to appear not just as the head of one of the European countries, but as the leader of the West, on whose behalf he allowed himself to make a number of statements. However, there is growing dissatisfaction in Eastern Europe with the fact that when choosing the candidacy of the new Secretary General, the Western members of the alliance did not take into account her opinion. In particular, Eastern Europeans were upset by the fact that none of the representatives of the countries of this region has ever headed NATO, and apparently he will not lead again. Another thing is that their Western colleagues could probably still cope with such a collective claim of the states of Eastern Europe with the help of persuasion and explanations on the topic of how important it is to preserve unity and continuity in such a difficult time. But Hungary's revealed position on this issue seriously reduces the chances of Western Europe and North America to put Mark Rutte in a key position in the alliance. After all, the Hungarian leadership is driven not by collective resentment, but by personal hostility to the Dutch Prime Minister. Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó openly stated that Budapest opposes the appointment of Mr. Rutte, a long-time critic of the Republic's authorities. Of course, we cannot support the election of a person to the post of NATO Secretary General who previously wanted to bring Hungary to its knees, Mr. Szijjártó said. The diplomat recalled to the Dutch politician how in 2021 he condemned the new legislation against sexual minorities introduced in Hungary, saying that the country led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban has nothing more to do in the European Union. The long-term goal is to bring Hungary to its knees on this issue, Mark Rutte said at the time. It is noteworthy that Péter Szijjártó's words were spoken a few days before Viktor Orban's trip to the United States, where he is scheduled to meet with Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, whose return to the White House is strongly feared in Europe. At the same time, the choice of Mark Rutte's candidacy, as reported by Western media, was largely due to faith in his ability to find an approach to Mr. Trump if he decides to move from threats to action and reduce the role of the United States in NATO if he wins the elections on November 5, 2024. At the Munich Security Conference in mid-February, Mr. Rutte casually called on allies to stop whining about Trump and instead invest in defense, which the Republican has always called on partners to do. It is not known what Messrs. Orban and Trump are going to talk about in the coming days, but for sure, we will also talk about NATO. At the same time, Donald Trump is perhaps one of the few politicians who could influence Budapest's position, which risks becoming a real problem for the alliance when choosing a new Secretary General. Hungary has already publicly indicated its attitude towards Mark Rutte, and it is impossible to appoint a leader without the consent of all NATO members. NATO also cannot actually offer Budapest anything in return for the approval of Mr. Rutte's candidacy. The Republic's serious disagreements with its Western colleagues are mainly along the lines of the European Union, and have nothing to do with the internal affairs of the alliance. Even the harsh words of the Dutch Prime Minister, spoken 3 years ago, were written into the European, not the North Atlantic context, thus bargaining with Hungary at NATO as it was during the difficult negotiations on Sweden's accession with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who really needed to receive specific bonuses from the Allies in exchange for his consent, is unlikely to work. And Donald Trump, who has not yet been elected President of the United States and is facing criticism from European politicians, obviously does not want to help anyone but himself. So it is possible that in the near future the Allies will have to resume the search for a replacement for Jens Stoltenberg, just in case.